evening, everyone. It's wonderful to have you join us. We have a nice crowd here in person, and for those of you at home, we're hoping that you will be alert to all the things that are going to happen tonight. We're celebrating Mental Health Awareness Month, and to do that, Nicole Coleman has agreed to put together 3 Wednesday night sessions. Tonight, the first session, she's going to be sharing quite a lot of material and a lot of different kinds of material. And so pay attention, and she's been sharing her story in this. So as we begin, I'd just like to start with a word of prayer, and then I'll turn it over to Nicole. And once again, welcome. Father, thank you for your grace, for your provision. God, that all things, our bodies, our soul, our spirit, our emotions, and our minds are all open for your renewal and redemption, transformation, and your power that is embedded in us. God, you give us all kinds of ways to come at this and to understand and discipline and develop skills and abilities. And I just ask, God, that you would help this community become a healthy community, not only just on our own, but God, helping one another. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you all so much for being here. I would like to start by getting a little bit of an idea of who is here. I do know quite a few of you, and I'm going to ask you to raise your hand if you're comfortable when I ask you these questions, because this will give me a little bit of an indication of who I am talking to. I know that we have people who are joining us on our YouTube channel and Facebook Live. Obviously, I'm not sure where they fit in this, but I am excited to have them with us as well. So, who in the room is a mental health professional? If that fits you, please raise your hand. Okay, so we've got some mental health professionals and peer support people in the room. How about a family member or a friend of someone who lives with addiction or mental health conditions? Okay, that's quite a lot of us. How about someone who they themselves live in recovery or is currently struggling with addiction or mental health conditions? Okay, quite a few. How about a Christian? How many Christians we got in the room? People who identify Jesus as their Lord. Beautiful. Okay. How about a Christian or a person who wants to understand how to support people with addiction or mental health conditions, and they don't have a lot of understanding of how to do that? Fantastic. Okay. Well, I am really excited that you are here with us tonight. I think that you are going to take away some good information. Let me tell you a little bit about myself in comparison to the questions that I just asked you. I am a Christian. I am a believer in Jesus Christ. And I do take great joy in sharing God's hope with people who live with addiction and mental health conditions, because those are 2 things that I have struggled with. I also do have a daughter who lives with mental health conditions. And by virtue of my job, I'm a county veteran service officer. I have a lot of people who I provide peer support and professional support to. I personally live with major depressive disorder, anxiety disorder, bipolar disorder, and PTSD. So those are a lot of conditions. Each one of them came one at a time, and I was talking with someone prior to the service about recently getting some diagnoses, and I remember, you get that diagnosis and you think, oh, I really did not want that label in my medical records. But when you get the information, it gives you power and it gives you resources. So it is a good thing. I would like to introduce you to my family. Now I understand why. Okay, so every time you guys see me do this, just go ahead and go forward for me. There we go. Go back one. There we go. So this is my family. My husband and I served in Desert Storm together, and the picture where we look considerably older is Being here is for me to share my story, to teach you how. That's, in my opinion, the key word of this line, to teach you how to listen to difficult things. So I'm going to share my story in significant more detail than I normally do, primarily for the people in this room who said, yep, I'm a Christian, I want to learn how to hear people's stories. Sometimes we have difficult things that we need to tell someone, and you just need to listen. You don't have to have answers. You don't have to be able to fix anything. You don't have to figure it out. We just need someone to listen. I'm going to teach you, hopefully, why it's important to listen. I want to help you learn what you are listening for in the connection with the hurting person, and then provide you with some resources on how you can support them and help them where they're at. And equally important, I want to provide you with some freedom so that when you walk away from here, you don't feel like you have to remember everything that you heard tonight or everything that you've ever read about mental health stuff in order to love someone. Everyone in here raised their hand that they are a Christian, they're a believer in Jesus Christ. That tells me that you understand the way God loves you. You don't always deserve it, but God loves you exactly how you are, where you are. He meets you where you are. And so that's what we need to do for hurting people. Meet them where they are, love them.
And why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you can climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. Yeah. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Learning how to hear someone's story and to connect with them while they're telling their story. So now I'm going to tell you some of my story. I was raised in a church. At one point during my childhood, I did go to this church and have been very grateful after my time in the military to return here and I was 14. I went to a graduation party with my mom. It was a boy who was older than me in our youth group at church, not this church, a different church. And because we knew the majority of the people there, my mom knew I was having fun. She went home because the boy who it was his graduation party said he would bring me home afterwards. And that was where my first sexual abuse happened. Was on my way home that night. Like I said, I was about 14. It took several years before I recognized that what happened to me was rape, because it was not something that I wanted. I just rationalized it in very unusual ways. And unfortunately, that set a foundation for who I thought I was and what I thought my value was. To compound the problems, that same summer, and the pastor of that church stopped over, and he sexually abused me while we were there. And that went on for the rest of the summer. And I was very active in the church. And so when he told me that he loved me and God was calling him to leave his wife and come to me, I was 14. I had no reason to think that that didn't make sense. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I'm not really sure which it is, that same summer, I met my first husband. And honestly, and what I was familiar to that summer. And it wasn't too long after that we started talking about marriage. I dropped out of high school when I was a junior in high school, and we got married. Obviously, most times when you get married when you're 16, don't have a good foundation. The marriage did not last. We are still friends to this day. But it was a very tough part of my journey, but I was able to learn from him some good things about marriage that I could take with me into my future. Was something I had wanted to do since I was a little girl, so I was incredibly grateful to be able to go in the military. The job that I wanted to do was not open for women to do when I was little, but by the time I was 17, it was open. So I got to be with the security forces in the Air Force, met my current husband, my first day at my first base, and we started dating about 3 or 4 months later. And we have been married. This year will be 29 years, so he has been through a lot with me, and we have overcome a lot in our time together. It was 4th of July, and I had went to a party on base, and I was drugged and raped by the brother of someone in my unit. And the people who would have my back if I went into combat watched. And that was very devastating, because then I had no idea who I could trust. Because I didn't remember the events throughout that evening, the way that the story was interpreted to my soon-to-be husband at the time was much different than what actually happened. And so obviously there was a lot of fighting, and we almost didn't get married, but I am very grateful that we did. So we got married, and I'll be honest, for the first several years of our marriage, when I looked at him, I remembered what happened, because it was so close to the time that we got married. And that brought a lot of trauma and a lot of heartache and a lot of challenges into the relationship with him. Desert Storm together, as I showed you in the picture. We had volunteered to go over because we were getting married and it was close to holiday season. We didn't have any children yet, and so we said, if you send the two of us over there together, then two of our, people that serve in our flight with us can stay home for the holidays. For anyone in here who's been in the military, they don't always really care what you think is a good idea, so that's not quite the way things went. So 2 weeks after we got married, they sent him over, and we were supposed to have a 3-month gap in between when he came home and when I went. And they called me at the end of September and said, you are going to be leaving in about 2 weeks to go over to Saudi Arabia. And I said, that's when my husband's coming home. And they said, we know, you're his replacement. I'm like, that's not very nice. I said, why don't you just leave him there and then someone else can come home or someone else doesn't have to go over? Minor communication problem. Keep in mind, we've been married about 3 months at this time, only lived together for 2 weeks. I forgot to ask him what he thought about that idea before I told the first sergeant that that was a good idea. He was a little perturbed, but he got over it. And we did. We got to be there together for 3 months, and that was a wonderful, wonderful journey. So now the rape that I told you about on July 4th of 1992, I actually did not remember the details of that night. I remembered it the way my husband told it to me, which was how other people had told it to him. And unfortunately, when our daughter went away to college, she was raped. And the night that she called me to tell me that she had been raped, that night, I woke up in the middle of the night with all of these bits and pieces of what had happened to me in 1992 coming back. And so now I'm dealing with the trauma of this just happened to my baby. She's a state away. I need to get to her. I'm afraid I'm going to have to go pick my husband up at jail because when I told him, he left. I believe I may have called Pastor that night and said, please help me find him. But it was very traumatic for the family as a whole, but there was an internal struggle that I didn't understand because I couldn't figure out if what I was thinking even made sense. And if you've ever had trauma in your life that was locked away somewhere, that probably makes sense to you. It did not make sense to me, but it does now. I witnessed a fatal motorcycle accident. So by this point, well, let me tell you a little story from in between those two boxes. In 2011, the gentleman who was the director of the Hancock County Veterans Service Office called me to say he was getting ready to announce his retirement, and he knew that I was very interested in his job, so he said, get your resume ready. So I submitted my resume, and this was 2 months after my daughter's rape. So I'm still dealing with everything flooding back. I applied for the job, got the job, and I only had about 10 days of overlap with my predecessor in a very small office, so I didn't have an opportunity to learn a lot. But what I did figure out very quickly was dominant men triggered me. So now what am I sitting in an office behind closed doors with pretty much every day? Dominant men who walk like veterans, talk like veterans, look like veterans, because they are. And it took about 1.5 years before I had a dissociative episode that made my situation aware enough to people around me that people started checking in on me regularly. I was at a conference in, I think, Reno, huge room, about 700 people in the room, And I had no idea where I was, why I was there. My hands were sweating. I couldn't breathe. And I felt like the room was closing in on me. It came break time. I waited until the 700 people ushered out, and then I went and found somewhere to sit down and cry. Someone saw me and got me to someone who could help me. And fortunately, the two men that they brought to me were people that I knew well, and I think that they had a bit of a clue, maybe a few years earlier, of that I had been exposed to military sexual trauma. And so they had a pretty good idea of what had probably happened. So they got me connected with another female who was there who had experienced the same thing in a nearby community so that she could keep an eye on me. And even being in this line of work, it took her 1.5 years to talk me into going and seeing someone. Because there was so much that I didn't know how to face. I didn't know what was going to come up. I mean, if these memories were stuck in there for 20 years and they came back without me talking to someone, what's going to happen if I go talk to someone? Like, what else is in there? And even being in counseling, it took probably 4 or 5 more years before I talked to my husband, because it's so hard to talk about. So now I'm at the motorcycle accident. So it's June 1st. That I can tell you exactly the date that Pastor preached and what it was on, because when something traumatic happens to us, there are a lot of things that get stuck in our brains, and sometimes they're great things, sometimes they're difficult things. For this, it was a great thing. His sermon that day was, sometimes we ask God, why is this happening? But what we really need to ask God is, what do you need me to be in the midst of what's happening? So I was sitting at a stop sign out in the country, motorcycles coming around the curve. I see him start to lose control, and instantly I prayed, God, what do you need me to be right now? I called 911. I went to him. I stayed with him. I prayed with him until, ambulance arrived and everyone took over. This is where I learned the difference between normal response to trauma and something that turns into a diagnosis of PTSD. I don't have a mental health background. I feel like I do because I've been in counseling for what feels like 400 years. So I have a lot of information and a lot of knowledge from my own personal experience. But it is very normal to have unusual thoughts and unusual responses following a trauma. And the best way that it was explained to me after this accident was when you are in an accident or you witness an accident, people ask you about it. Everywhere you go. What happened? So you tell the story time and time and time again, and each time you tell the story, it's healing for you. The problem is when someone is raped, sexually abused, in combat, those are not the types of things that people should ask you to tell you about over and over and over again. But we need a safe place to be able to say it. And for me, I found Celebrate Recovery and many relationships here at this church, along with counselors, professional counselors, who have been those places for me. And sometimes even sharing that kind of information with someone who's really close to you is really difficult. So it is important to have other people in your life who you can share those things with. In 2016, and it's kind of a funny story. So at the beginning of the year in 2016, I attended a small group here at this church that Scott Gray led. Don't remember what it was called, but the gist of it was that we would share hopes and dreams, and then he would ask us questions about what do we need to do? What steps do we need to take to see those come to truth? And one of mine was to be able to start a group called Veterans Discovering New Life. So it's a place where faith is a part of the recovery journey for veterans who, they don't have to struggle with PTSD, but a good majority of them who come to the group do. So I got the group started, and my goal was to run the group on Tuesday nights, about an hour and a half before Celebrate Recovery started, here at the church, so that the hope was then they would come back here, because I knew this would be another source of support for them. So being the good Christian girl that I was, of course, I came with them because I was going to support them. And it was chip night, which if you're not familiar with chip night, that means they're giving out coins for 24 hours in recovery, 30 days in recovery, 60 days, and so on. I was not familiar with 12-step programs or CHIPS or any of that kind of, well, I'm very familiar with CHIPS, potato chips, but I was not familiar with Celebrate Recovery chips. And so when they called out the first chip and they said 24 hours, I started sobbing because I had no idea when was the last time I went 24 hours without drinking. Now keep in mind, I was very active in the church. God was using me. He was still a part of my life. I wasn't useless. I wasn't worthless. I may have been a little more difficult to get along with at home, but I was still God's daughter, and he was still using me. But I needed someone to meet me where I was and offer me steps to get from where I was to a different place of hope and peace and joy with God. And that's what Celebrate Recovery did for me. So when we talk and connecting with them, I really like this quote. It says, when you show deep Now I'm going to tell you some of the kinds of problems that you will potentially be helping people with if you are trying to support someone who lives with addiction or lives with mental health conditions, are things that, if you've never experienced it, seem foolish. What do you mean you haven't opened your mail for 4 months? Hi, just throw it away and they'll send it again, because I can't deal with it. That's not uncommon. Stacks and stacks and stacks of boxes, because I don't know what to do with it, and I don't have the energy to think about it. Disorganization in their life, tall grass, piles of stuff that need cleaned up. So sometimes these are things that you can look at it. If you can look at it without judging, meet them where they are things that you are going to be able to help them with. Those aren't difficult things. Bring your mail over. I'll get my letter opener out. I'll get my trash can out. Probably most of it is trash, but let's look at it together. That's one thing I wish people would have offered to help me with. And so it's one of the first things I ask people. If I know that a mental health or an addiction issue is something they struggle with, I say, when's the last time you opened your mail? Now, these are people I know. I wouldn't recommend that be the first question you ask someone you don't know, because that sounds a little rude. But once you get to know them, that is something you can ask them. What's something that's hard for you to do that I could help you with? Could I bring you a meal next week? Would you like to go to lunch after church on Sunday? Some of the other things that you will definitely notice is relationship challenges. it is often hard for us to figure out how to communicate with people we love. And I have a lot of resources. This church has done a great job of bringing in speakers who teach us how to work through communication problems and challenges, and I have copies of all kinds of things that I'd be happy to share with you after this is over. I have been a part of hers. And within the last 6 months, there was a day that she called me, and actually she texted me because she wasn't well enough to talk. And she said she needed help. And based on some of the things she had said in the text, I was a little concerned that I didn't know what to do when I got there. She wanted to go to her room, so we sat in her room. She couldn't talk. She didn't look at me. So I just sat beside her. I just put my arms around her and sat there. I hummed songs every once in a while that I knew she liked. I asked her if she could find a song on her phone that she liked. But we probably sat there for 2 hours, and we may have listened to 3 songs. And when I left, I thought, I have no idea if that was helpful at all. But I knew she was safe, and I knew she was now ready to go to sleep for the night, so she would have a safe night. And about, a couple of months later, we met for coffee, and she said, I have a book in my car that I would like to read to you. And she went out and she got this book, and she brought it into the coffee shop and read it to me. And the book is obviously about a bunny who something awful has happened. That just shattered her whole world. And I realized that, if you're thinking, okay, I'm going through something really traumatic, that's not it. But we have to remember not to compare our traumas to other people's, because we don't know what it means to them. So this was very traumatic for this little child. And when something traumatic happens, that can make people feel hopeless. They can't see the future. They can't see past where they are. And that can lead to suicide. Suicide is the second lead. Are and love them exactly as they are. This last statistic, to me, makes so much sense because I lived there. The average 11 years of living with the symptoms, living with the relationships that are falling apart, and the drinking and the drugs and the whatever it is that's tearing your life apart, because it is so hard to make that first phone call or walk in that office the first time. One of the most helpful things you can do for someone is ask them if they would like for you to go with them to schedule the appointment. Or ask them, would you like for me to just be in the waiting room so that you know you have someone out here when you come out, and then we'll go get ice cream. or we'll go drive around and turn the music up full blast and roll the windows down, whatever you need. That way they're not alone, because that is very, very scary. Suicide and it's treatable. And again, we have the hope. We just need to share it. This study that was done by Georgetown University, I thought, I was very excited about this. Now, I don't particularly love the choice of words because I think I would prefer to say people might impact what they choose to do. So if we tell them, you just need to pray harder. Do you have enough faith in God? Do you believe He can heal you? Yeah, I do. But it might not be until I get to heaven. And He's going to give me the grace I need to live with what I have while I'm here. So are you going to be a part of that? If not, please get out of my way. Because we need people to support us where we are. So I want to tell you that there are resources. Mentioned are up here on the table. If you're anything like me, if I were here, I would want to come up and take pictures of the books that I was interested in so that I could remember when I got home what I wanted. But you also can find the list on the website. There is also a few of the local resources, one of those being the Adamus Board, which has, that's Addiction, Mental Health Services. I'm not getting all of the letters, but that's roughly what it stands for. And then the other one is HancockHelps.org. So that is a great resource if you are trying to help someone find an apartment, you're trying to help someone find a food bank, just about anything in our community. ACR, you can find all of those. So if you know someone who needs to attend multiple groups, which is not uncommon, they need to go somewhere every day, but they don't know where they are, HancockHelps.org, and you can find every day. Here's the list of all the different groups that they can choose from. So let's talk a little bit about the brain from the title of a book that I read. Thank you very much, Barb Meyer, for sharing that book with me. It is an incredible book. In this book, the author talks a lot about, he is a doctor, and he talks about different mental health diagnoses, how it's diagnosed, and one of my favorite parts is then he uses the current DSM, which I have no idea what that stands for, but it's how they diagnose people with mental health conditions. He uses that to diagnose people from the Bible. King Saul probably had bipolar, according to him. And it's really interesting. So, if you're helping someone or supporting someone, being able to tell them, hey, you're like King Saul. Now let's make sure you don't die by suicide. Let's get you the help that you need, because there's a lot that you have to offer. But look at all the great things he did. God used him. One of the things that I really liked in this book was this specific quote. We all You understand that? The same but a lot of people tell those of us who live with mental health conditions that maybe we don't need to take our medicine. That maybe we just need to find a better way to live. And I will tell you, I would really rather not have the side effects that go with the medicine I have to take. I went on it and off of it multiple times because of the side effects. But I'm not healthy if I don't take it. And I can't fulfill the plan that God has for my life if I'm not healthy. So I need to take my medicine, continue therapy, continue to learn what I need to learn to be healthy with mental health conditions. And I really liked this quote from one of the ladies who read this book. It says, "Grace for the mental illness, you know, it's very hard on the family and the friends as well." He recommend the book. So when a flower our environment and make sure that we are creating the kind of environment that they can bloom in. There is no way that I could ever properly thank and show appreciation for the people in this church who have poured into my life, my marriage, my family, the people who met me where I was, supported me, walked beside me. If they judged me, I never saw it. They never acted like they were disappointed in things that I did that should have been disappointing. They loved me right where I was and never asked me to change. However, they always empowered me to have the information that I needed to grow and move to the next step. So let's talk a little bit about barriers that people might be dealing with if they have addiction or mental health issues. Could be transportation issues. Because if you don't, they will sense that you don't mean it. If they need childcare, babysit. If you're horrible with children, help them find someone. I usually don't offer to babysit. Lack of mental health professionals. So I will tell you that is one of the huge struggles, not just in our community, but across the country. We have wonderful mental health systems in our community. There's just not enough. And there is a long waiting list to be able to see a counselor, to be able to see a psychiatrist. I can't tell you the number of people that I have had to take to the ER to be admitted into the psychiatric ward because they needed medicine and they were a new patient, and the only way they could see a psychiatrist was if they were admitted to the psychiatric ward. And I'm not blaming the system, I'm not blaming anyone, it just is how it is. And I think that everyone is doing the best they can. I will say, if there's someone who's listening to this, who has a heart for that and wants to go into that line of work, consider it. Look at that as an option, because there is a great need for that. But one of the things that you can do, if you know someone who is struggling in that way, is be an ear for them to listen to. And it might be that they're going to tell you the exact same thing every day until they get to see someone. And they don't need you to fix it. They might want you to help make phone calls, but they don't need you to fix anything. They just need someone to listen and someone to care. So while you are depressed, the ostrich comes. But then the rabbit comes along. So the practical things that you can do mail them cards, deliver them. Talk a little bit about the difference between normal grief and clinical depression. The difference between the difference between those two with the motorcycle accident. The difference with grief and clinical depression from a layman's terms is grief, you're going to go through stages. You're going to process the grief. Depression is something that sometimes it shows up for no reason at all. Same thing with anxiety. It just happens. Some people are going to get to a point where they are living in a fully recovered life. But that normally does not mean that they are cured. I can't explain it. I can just tell you that I have lived a healthy life for several years, and there still are times that I just have a bad day. And it's not like a normal, I'm missing someone, grief kind of bad day. It is, I am in deep depression and I cannot get out of bed. Or it's a sunny Saturday and I want to go buy a new car. You know, it's just crazy. But sometimes you will look at the person and you'll think, they're totally healthy. They're cured. But don't judge them if they have a bad day. I assure you, they did not make a choice to wake up feeling that way. I want to talk a little bit about the mental health recovery. Who lives with a mental illness or an addiction issue, and you are their caregiver and you just want to be their mom. You just want to be their dad. It's so hard. Keep having hope. Keep doing the best you can to provide them resources. You can't make them want it more than they want it for themselves. Keep loving them right where they are, just like God does with us. The next step is manager. You're just helping the person manage their life. The next step is and then that final step is getting to the point where you can just be their family. Sees, the butterfly come out of a cocoon, and then he sees a cocoon and wants to help the butterfly out of the cocoon. Well, we all know what happens if you do that. It's very painful, and it's not a good outcome. So when you see someone who you think, wow, they're stuck, I got to get them out of there. You cannot take them out of where they are. They have to be ready and willing to take that step and make that change on their own. But you can walk. I almost thought about not putting it in there for the context of this, but in this chapter in the book, the author is talking about how sometimes people in the church, when they are interacting with someone who has a mental health diagnosis, they'll think, well, let's just cast the demons out of them. Well, I don't have demons in me. I have Jesus Christ in me. So don't be casting Jesus Christ out of me. You can walk alongside me and you can support me when I'm having a bad day and I look like a demon. You can love me right there. And that's what we need to do for everyone. easily stick in your mind that you know you don't have to remember any of the details of what I shared tonight. Remember our church website and the rabbit who listened. Validate it is. Validate your own feelings because they're real. Discover new life. Thank you.
I don't know if that helped you at all, man. Thank you for that. Cindy and I walk with someone very, very close to us, and we're in the caregiver moment. And some of those things are pretty helpful to think through. And so whether you're the one who's dealing with all the emotions, and I'll have to tell you that for Cindy and I, both of us, not struggling and always able, seemingly, to be able to pull ourselves up with the bootstraps, that kind of concept, and then walk alongside of someone who you love as much as your own self and recognize that why can't they do that? And then you realize mental illness and recovery all at the same time. So this is a huge issue. One of the reasons why we're doing these things very focused. This is a huge, huge issue in the world, and it is a huge issue with God. For us to be able to be equipped to create environments, I love the way the language goes, and provide the resources to help us to be a place where Nicole can flourish and grow and become a leader and a spokesman. And so thank you for being here, and God bless you all. Check those resources out, and if you have any questions, I'm sure Nicole would entertain those after we close. But I'm going to pray, and you can be dismissed. Thanks for joining us at home. Father, thank you for your grace. And let's just use the title, Grace for the Afflicted. Thank you for that. Thank you that all of us in our afflicted whatevers, you have not judged us, you have not condemned us, and you have not shamed us, but you have come to rescue us and to give us hope and a future, and to call us your own, to have compassion on us, empathy for us. You sent your Son so that we wouldn't be alone, and that we would have an advocate by your Spirit that knows everything inside of us, how we think and how we feel. And I ask God that we as your church have a greater capacity to be an expression of that kind of grace and love. In Jesus' name, amen. Good. Thank you all.